Hello and welcome to Macro Mondays, brought to you by David Gokhshtein and the Gokhshtein News Network. I am your host, Landy, and today is January 19th, 2026. We're looking at Bitcoin today. And right off the rip, Bitcoin did fulfill the criteria to move down to $92,000. So here on spot price, we did get a low in the Monday session of 91,935. So basically $92,000. And that was upon hitting one of our primary upside targets, kind of in order. Well, a couple of primary upside targets above 93.5 to 94. The zone of interest was between 94 and 96. We got that back here on Tuesday of last week, with the high coming in at 96,250, and then the next area was 98 to 101. But realistically, 96 to 98. We saw the high come in just shy of 98 on spot at 97,963. And I'd mentioned that, if we dropped the weekly at 93.5, and it's kind of, back below 96, looking at 94, got 94,229 there. And then anywhere below there, it's basically $2,000 at a time down to 92. And that's essentially what we have seen. And it's just mean reversion. Now, I mentioned that as long as Bitcoin's above this consolidation higher low structure, around 89 to 90, it's fine. Sideways and up is the name of the game. But if we do start to see yesterday's low dropped at around that 92, I would start to look at that last higher low consolidation somewhere around 89 to 90. If we do see Bitcoin trade below there, we're right back to, essentially, 87, 88, which is going to be right around the low side structure here, to 86 at the weekly. And then, of course, below there, you start getting into the lows here where it's essentially 83.5. You can call it 83.5 to 84, depending on your chart, to that $86,000 weekly. Now, I'm not showing it right now because I wanted a little bit of a cleaner look at price action as it stands right now, because I want to zoom out a bit. And, many are going to call this what it is, and that is a bearish setup or a bear flag. It's extended, though. I would argue that it could play out that way if we start seeing especially 89 to 90 dropped below here. You got a whole bunch of trend lines that people are drawing on this structure here. But, realistically, the horizontal levels are going to be just as powerful, if not more. And Bitcoin, has a few different things going on with it. I want to go out to the weekly here and show you a little bit of a volume profile again locally from the last major low through the uptrend and then into the trend break on the weekly. And of course, this was the monthly higher low, right? So essentially what we're doing is we're just on the weekly and we're pulling out to the monthly. So we can take the one prior to that as well from 49 all the way over. And you can see that between, the two pulls here for volume profile on spot, Bitcoin's price is essentially trapped. And it's trapped between two major areas. Now we have gotten some more volume in where the point of control now is around 96,380, just up slightly from like the 96.2 area. And realistically, Bitcoin traded up to it, closed slightly above it, deviation above it, and then right back down to revert to the mean. And then, of course, we've seen a lot of volume come in around this area here at the $87,500, $87,000 area, which, of course, is right around that major weekly. So these are two of the most highly traded prices, essentially, for volume, right? So once we see a concerted breakout on a weekly, that's going to be the weekly move, quite honestly. And I don't really necessarily mean like as soon as it closes below 87, it's destined to go down. It has to fulfill criteria on that weekly. So if we go back out to the weekly, we would need to see it close below the point of control and below the most recent low on the weekly, which is at 86.8, $87,000, not far from that pivot or that point of control. And then, of course, we would need to see closes below that 80,500, which, of course, is this weekly right here. And then, of course, I've mentioned this a few times before, but if this ends up becoming a high and Bitcoin does not push any higher, then because this is an expansion on the weekly time frame, what we typically see after the initial expansion from compression up here at the highs is we'll see it, expand down through the bands, get really volatile, mean revert, and then come down and test wherever that lower second standard deviation is. Now, if it meets the criteria of closing below this low, it's very highly likely that this trend break to weekly trend reversal, if it were to happen here, or even higher, usually results in continuation, but not always. But it is something to be aware of. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say that Bitcoin puts in a high in the weekly. How would it do that? From here, it would have to put in a high in the weekly on closes below $90,000, right? And then from there, we would have a bias to testing, obviously, all the areas we just talked about on the daily. But from the weekly standpoint, if it starts to break down below the lower first, it's playing in between the lower first and lower second bands here in terms of volatility. And that's where we get confluence on the daily, on closes below weekly levels, so on and so forth. And we essentially have $86,000 here, and then basically 86.8 here. So there's two major weeklies. This is a high, a lower high, and a lower low that has essentially been set in here. You could call this the weekly low as well at almost 88, 877. But however you want to measure it, if those areas are lost, likely going for that lower second, which is going to be just below the 78,370 here, now pushing into the mid $70,000, just shy of 77 there at 76,811. And this is, something that I've been talking about is that the weekly is looking for a bounce, whether it comes right from here, and that's what we got. And that's where, if it fades really quickly, you have to be aware of continuation down to test that lower second, and then continuation of the downtrend from there. If it closes below 80,524 here, which is essentially this weekly closing lower low over here, that's where we would be looking for, the trend to continue on the weekly to the downside. Although there's a few scenarios where, as long as it doesn't close below there, it can bounce right back up. And then if the lower high is closer, the bulls can try to go for it to get a trend break, or, essentially invalidate the trend reversal setup if this were to be a trend reversal setup. We wouldn't know that until we see if, we would have to see closes below that $90,000. That's where that becomes key, because then this would be a lower high. So that is something to watch out for as this week progresses. And to the upside, we have essentially the basis band up here on the weekly, right around the close open of this higher low, right at 101 essentially. It is slightly below 101, but be aware that, it's 98, right where we just essentially hit the swing. And then the next area to watch would be right around 101, which is the basis on the weekly. So let's go back to the daily really quick here. I think the criteria is pretty darn clear. This is an easy chart to read. It's not very ambiguous at all. It's just a matter of looking for conditions to be met one way or the other. And when looking at the areas of interest here, very, very clear. Above 101, which is now where it's the top side of this zone up here, right? That's where we can entertain, 102.5 to 103, 650 here, possibly a move to the weekly, which I might as well mark. We should actually have it marked here because there's so much overhead resistance above here. It's this close open on the weekly right here, which is right around 104.5, 105. So we should know where that is. And Let's go ahead and make it a white line, white horizontal. Now the Bitcoin's finally has a shot. The other thing that I want to note here is where the weekly closed. The weekly did not close above 93.5, which is this higher low right here. We need to see closes above there to really, we essentially got our test up, right? Through the point of control on the daily, right to it on the daily, and then right up essentially to this higher low swing. If we do get continuation or closes back above 93.5, I would look for this area to be the main area of interest up to that 98 to 101. Anywhere above there, we could start looking 102.5 to essentially 105, right? This weekly close open. So it's essentially this area here, 102.5 to 104 to 105. And then the key area in there would be 107 to 108. And that's the area that would need to be recovered by the bulls. That would definitely start shaking out a lot of shorts, and shorts covering into that area would probably be pretty heavy, but it wouldn't be until SL closes above 112 that it gets interesting for the bulls. Obviously reclaiming the higher low that was holding up the highs here would be a key thing to watch for by that upper first. But it doesn't really get interesting in terms of a squeeze. You get a lot of covering into these areas, but in terms of an actual squeeze above there, I'd be looking 112 is really where the opportunity comes. And what bulls would want to see is an extension off of this low here to really push into this zone up here to give them a higher percentage chance of, even if it's a lower high, trying to put in a higher lower equilo structure. Could still happen from this area as well, even if this does become a high. That's where we can entertain the possibility of higher low equilo structure from here that could break this high and start an uptrend. But realistically, if you look at the setup that we have here for Bitcoin, this is going to take a while for it to work itself out, because even if it shot all the way to the top side, right? The bands are pretty wide set right now. And this is where, it's got to go back into a compression for the next real big move. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to trend down. So it would have to come up, get above the basis, start to extend, even if it's a lower high as it relates to, a higher high, because this is just a trend break as it stands right now. So a lower high, even if it was here, hold the lows, higher low equilo structure, break the downtrend, and then go back into a compression setup for the next real big move. And so far, we're just seeing it slowly play out to the upside here, and we await the next bigger move. Nothing too crazy there. We have a few other things. So we'll go to silver, as that is still the hot topic of the day. It did hit our $95 call. Right, and the next big area is going to be essentially 98 to, you could even call it 105. It's 103.84, but essentially 98 to 105. And obviously, you can call it 98 to 100 initially, and then looking up to like 105 is fair game still. Above there, we can start entertaining deeper targets, but you see the upper third is right there at 105. 105.38 in this case for the upper third standard deviation. And I maintain that above 70, even if this corrects hard, if it above 70, it's fine and can still continue to bounce around and even make new higher highs. I mentioned this on the daily. If it doesn't set a high here, it's sideways and up is the name of the game. Right now, for continued grind sideways and up, need to remain above 88. Can safely drop down to the highs here between 80. It's really 80. It can safely drop down to 80 and it's still fine. And then even then, the last higher low in the daily, it could even deviate and still continue to flush out the highs here. So to the upside, above 95, look 98 to 105 as a general area. Here on the daily, you could see how this is lining up with the upper third. Fair game at that 103.83, but weekly saying 105 is also fair game. So 98 to 100 on the daily, and then above there, 105 is clearly going to be an area of interest. If it plays the fibs perfectly, great, but I would give it some room. And in this case, if it does correct, just watch $80 right around the basis band. Anywhere below there, if it starts dropping the low at 73.86, 74, then we're looking for 70, and that's kind of the do or die zone for what's going on right now for silver. But it's got room, so it can definitely play. Gold, nice big old move up. And yes, it's CFDs on gold, I know. We did not get 47, but we got 46.76. 47 is on deck, and so is 48, as long as it's trading above the 2414 at 45 to 45.33 here. Anywhere below there, we're looking below 45 down to the basis and the upper 44s around the 44.84. And things start to change. Well, things would start to change in the daily in terms of structure below 45.36 here, but things do start to change a little bit on longer term time frames below 44. If we go to the weekly, that's where the upper first standard deviation is that could lead to us seeing gold test around the 42.75, 42.50 low, and potentially mean reverting back down to 40 to 41 and a half or so, or even 4,000. And just be on the lookout. Like this could even run on the weekly above 47 to 47.50 or so by the upper second. That would not be out of the question to the upside as well. And that's where we can start going over and looking at traditional markets. Dow closed. This is going to be the Friday candle, right? So markets are closed, but we can go over to futures and see that it's right at the basis. It's really going to be all about where things kind of end up before market open tomorrow, if we get that gap down or not for Dow. And it's right at the bottom side of the range. So if it does drop, 49,000 for futures, we're likely going to see, a larger correction. It's sitting right on this high right now, right around 49,050 bucks. So just watch it carefully. All of the stuff from Friday still applies. Looking at NASDAQ, did swing now this low on futures. And that low's at that 25.265, right down by the lower second. Now this is a compression, so if this starts to break down, we're looking at 25 to 24.8. Pretty straightforward stuff. SPX, when we look at futures, obviously swung that low and even opened below that low and rejected right down towards the lower second. Now, here's the thing. It needs to break down below the 68, 67, so 686, essentially, for SPY. Now, if it does that, that would be expansion to the downside, right? But and the same goes for NASDAQ, right? If it breaks down below 25,275, it's going to be expansion into the next area. A little bit of a different look for Dow, right? For futures here, down to 48.68, and even down to the actual low, we would need to see a break below 48.1 to really kick off expansion to the downside. Don't be surprised if you see bounces off the lower second, lower third zone here. That would actually be pretty typical if it does. So don't be surprised if you see it. It could go either way. It could break down and get expansion tomorrow. Same for SPY and SPY futures. Could get expansion to the downside tomorrow, but just watch it carefully. I wouldn't rule out bounces from these areas because we're moving from a little bit of a more volatile move up, consolidation, and then it's either going to break down on expansion into the next areas of support, or it's going to bounce. And that's true of, where Dow is around the basis, NASDAQ, and then, of course, SPY futures. So That is, or S&P futures, I should say. And that's kind of it. Pretty much everything that we talked about on Friday applies today. Obviously, there was no trading today. So it's really about the futures markets. And Bitcoin, just watch carefully. If it does drop it, watch 90. That's going to 89 to 90. It can swing it, but it's about closes. Specifically, it's about closes. So that's all I got for you this Monday. I will be back on Wednesday for the Wednesday check-in this week. And I hope you like and share this out there if you did find this helpful. And I will look, I know some of you have said, hey, can you look at a few other things? I'm going to start integrating that this week. So maybe Wednesday I'll take a look at some of the requests again. So like Milo, I've seen some of yours, and some others I've seen yours as well. And I will take a look at some of what you have pointed out that you'd like to see me chart out. And have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. And of course, as always, stay safe. With all that being said, Landy out. Take care.